Hola, hola, buenos días a todos. Es un placer darles la bienvenida en el inicio de nuestra segunda temporada de Neextt Talks. Originalmente nosotros teníamos planeados a principio de año iniciar con los Neextt Talks. Al momento que llegó la pandemia, que nadie esperaba, decidimos adelantar el lanzamiento de los Neextt Talks y los primeros 3 meses los quisimos dedicar a temas relacionados con lo que estaba sucediendo. A partir de julio queremos retomar el concepto original, por lo tanto tendremos 2 Neextt Talks al mes. La intención de estos Neextt Talks será tocar temas sobre estrategias de marketing, innovación, negocios, con líderes de opinión tanto de la industria como de industrias relacionadas con el turismo. El día de hoy estamos de manteles largos, que nos acompaña con nosotros Judy Frank. Judy es profesora en la Universidad de Northwestern, donde imparte cursos de comunicación y marketing en los programas de la maestría de Integrated Marketing Communications en la Escuela de Medill. Judy se unió en Northwestern en el año de 2018, después de una carrera de 23 años en las principales agencias de publicidad de Chicago, donde ascendió a puestos ejecutivos en las estrategias de medios y comunicación. Judy, entre muchos otros, ha desarrollado estrategias para marcas como Allstate, Hallmark y Lego. Y recientemente publicó su primer libro, Media from Chaos to Clarity. Este texto ha sido ampliamente utilizado por la industria en Estados Unidos y por varias universidades. Recientemente, en su programa de marketing, lo adoptó la escuela de Stern School of Business de NYU. En 2008, Judy lanzó The Marketing Democracy, una consultoría global que ayuda a las empresas a desarrollar estrategias de branding y comunicación. Y en este 2020, The Marketing Democracy lanzará un programa virtual de capacitación para pymes en todo el mundo. Muchas gracias a todos por acompañarnos. Judy, please, if you can join us with your camera. Judy, hola, how are you?
Aloha, Carlos. Thank you so much for having me. And it's a pleasure to meet all of you who are joining along with us from wherever you are right now. I hope you're all safe and healthy.
Judy, so it's my pleasure to leave you here with starting the second season of Neextt Talks. So it's my pleasure. I'm going to turn off my camera so you can start with your talk. Welcome.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you for having me. I am going to be sharing with you today kind of the merger from what I am seeing in media in terms of how we as individuals use media and what that means for you as marketers. So I'm coined our conversation today, and I hope it does turn into a conversation, a three-dimensional view of your customers. So with that, I'm going to turn off my camera so that we can focus on the slides today. So if we can now move to our next slide. When we think about audiences in the media, and this is important because as marketers, you use media as a means of sending your marketing messages to your customers and connecting with them and engaging with them. So we need to understand how we as audience members use the media. And I think it's important for us to recognize that audiences to the media exist in 3 different dimensions. The first one is we exist as unique individuals. Every single one of us has our own media diet. We have specific wants and needs and media habits, and the way we consume media does not look the same as anyone else. We may have similarities, but each and every one of us has our own unique media footprint. Okay, so it's highly individual, number one. But number 2, we also use media in networked communities. Now, you all know, well, of course, Judy, there are things like social media networks, right? So our Facebook and our Instagram and our LinkedIn, and those are based upon our relationships with each other. But I also think it's important for us to understand that communities actually form around media content itself. So if I am a fan of a particular television show, or if I read a particular newspaper or magazine, I become a part of that community as well, and I identify as such. And the third dimension that we have to recognize is that we all take part in pop culture. And when you think about it, pop culture is shaped by the media experiences of a particular generation. So we tend to share our common experiences. Who was on the cover of Time magazine? Who shot JR? Who was the next bachelor or bachelorette? So pop culture is crucial to our media consumption. Next slide, please. What I would like to do is give you a little bit more background about each of these three dimensions. So let's start off by talking about media and the self. We all have ideal selves, who it is that we ultimately want to be. And I think the important thing for us to remember is when we look to curate our ideal selves, we take those cues from all different forms of media. Professional curators such as editors and publishers and anchor people. We look at media celebrities who are important to us, and also influencers who we don't know personally, but they exist in the social media sphere. So curating our ideal self through the media is something that we do all the time. The other thing is the looking glass self. We are super concerned, if you will, with how we present ourselves to others in a media context. So think about our social media personas. We don't post just any picture to social media. We post the best picture to social media because we want to get positive reactions from our followers. When I put something out on Twitter and I only tweet as Professor Franks, I'm very interested in how many likes that tweet got or how many followers I now have. So the looking glass self is crucial. And finally, we use media as a sense of symbolic self-completion. So your taste in music, your taste in books, your taste in film, all says something about who you are. And lately, we've used the term FOMO, fear of missing out. Well, media consumption, especially during times of the coronavirus pandemic, has become an incredible source of FOMO. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about media and communities. Now, this is a fascinating one because when the long tail theory came out from Chris Anderson, we expected that audience attention would leave mass media, would leave the fat head, if you will, and travel all the way down to the tail, because there was something called audience autonomy, that each and every one of us had the freedom to choose whatever media content interested us, right? Well, wrong. Because we discovered something in the process, and what we discovered was that our media consumption is an incredible source of social glue. We use media to relate to our friends, to our families, to our co-workers, and to other groups in society. So what we discovered is that if our media consumption goes too far outside of our social sphere, if you will, we tend to weaken our social ties, and that's dangerous. So here, even though we have all kinds of media choice, the reality is that our media choices are bound by our relationships with others. And the last point about communities is that we discovered quickly that the economics of great content production need scaled audiences. So this idea that media producers could make high profits, one audience member at a time, it didn't work. So if you look at the recommendation systems, such as Netflix, you will see that the recommendation systems tend to skew you to what's popular in your particular community. Next slide, please. Finally, let's take a look at media and culture. Media has always been an interlinked part of our culture. Hence the 40-year book that I actually use in one of my classrooms at Northwestern, Media, Culture, and Society. But what's important for us to understand today is the culture production system. And if you look at the culture production system, you're going to see that that culture is now co-created by both formal and informal, more personal gatekeepers. And I think this is important because some marketers are making the mistake of walking away from formal culture production agents, and they believe that all of culture is happening by influencers and individuals in social media. That is not the case. It is still a symbiotic relationship. And I think it's important for us to understand that brands need culture that is both formally produced and curated by individuals and their communities. Next slide, please. Which dimension is right? So I presented to you a three-dimensional view of media audiences. And the question that I want to raise today is it time to declare a war against the three historical views and pick a winner? Next slide. This is what we know is true. We have entered a very different age. We call it the age of mass customization. We know that regardless of whatever industry we're talking about, the travel industry, luxury brands, cosmetics, fashion, that customers expect a highly personal experience. Well, what exactly does that mean? That means two very important things I would like to share with you today. The first one is the idea of the market of one. Now, what do I mean by the market of one? I mean that it is up to each marketer to make any single customer feel like they are the most important customer in the world. So while you may have hundreds of thousands of customers, I, Judy, want to feel special. I want to feel like you know me, you value me, you understand me, and you make me feel special. Next slide, please. Mass customization also has given rise to DTC brands, direct-to-consumer brands. And that is the idea that we create products and services that are tailored to my specific wants and needs. So as I'm wearing glasses today, I imagine that many of you who are on this webinar today also wear glasses, but each and every one of us have our unique prescription and our unique sense of style. So I want to make sure that I can get a product that is absolutely right for me. Next slide, please. But here's the question that I want to raise for you. Does mass customization through the market of one and the rise of DTC products mean that how we market should focus solely on the individual? There's an expression that I love and I want to share with you today. We may be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If we take this idea too far, we might be making a grave mistake. Next slide, please. Why are we even having this conversation? I think we are having this conversation today because marketers are under incredible pressure to be highly efficient with your marketing expenditures and highly accountable. Next slide. The interesting thing is that today, marketers have a wide choice in terms of how you purchase media to engage with your customers. And I know we normally like to read left to right, but I'm actually going to start from right to left. Let's start off with mass media, because that's how you are used to buying advertising time and space. The idea would be you would go to a particular media brand that had an audience that was appealing to you, and you would buy advertising and that particular media brand to reach the entire audience. So the idea was very, very mass. Now, we always knew that there was waste in that approach, but we didn't necessarily care because we valued not only the audiences that we were reaching, but the environment that we were placing our marketing in as well. Now let's slide over to the middle of the continuum and let's talk about marketing to communities. There are two ways that we can execute media buys to do so. We can use influencers who have communities of followers around them. And if we get an influencer to talk about our brand, we can now engage with all of those people for whom that influencer has a relationship. Or we can do something called contextual targeting, meaning that if I am interested in travel to the Mexican Riviera, that content around sites and things to do in the Mexican Riviera will automatically generate a community of interested audience. Now let's slide all the way to the left and talk about addressable technology. Because of the way digital media works, we now have an opportunity to, instead of buying everyone that is showing up on a particular publisher's page, we can buy each individual visitor one at a time based upon the characteristics of that individual. So on the surface, it looks like, well, wait a minute, now that we can buy what we refer to as addressable targeting, that has to be the most efficient way to do it, right? Next slide, please. Let's talk about this approach a little bit further because it seems like the default strategy in marketing today is to try to eliminate as much waste, notice I'm using quotes around that, in mass media as possible. So we have reframed paid media as a precision marketing tool, meaning I am only going to pay to advertise to those individuals who have exhibited some type of behavior that gives me a signal that they are shopping for my category or my brand. Then what I'm going to do is activate communities by implementing either paid media or trying to do it organically through what is referred to as native to engage a community. Finally, I'm going to say, you know what? Mass media is too expensive. I'm only going to consider it when it's free, due to word of mouth that I'm getting, because you know what? There's too much waste and I can no longer measure and prove that it works. All right, so the question for you that I have is this approach really the most efficient? Sometimes yes, but oftentimes no. Because in order to execute this, you need to consider the infrastructure that it takes to execute one-to-one at scale. It's expensive to do so. Why is that the case? Because we know that when we buy something a la carte, when we buy something one thing at a time, it is much more expensive than buying in bulk. You know this from going out to a restaurant. If you buy a prefix meal, it tends to be a better value than if you buy each individual food item one at a time. The third thing that I'm going to ask you to consider is really if you look at contextual relevance. So let's go back to this example of looking at a site that has beautiful editorial around travel to the Mexican Riviera. My question for you is, how much waste is there in that total audience? So even though you are buying the individuals who have exhibited search behavior that they're ready to buy, we might argue that, wait a minute, any audience member who is engaging with that content is going to be valuable to you in some way or form. Next slide, please. So I'm going to ask for you to reconsider this approach. And what if we literally turned it upside down? I'm going to go back to that idea of the market of one, making me feel like the most valuable, most important customer in the world, and that you really understand me. What if we used addressable media not to stalk the person who may be ready to buy your product, but what if we use it to make your customers that you already have feel like the most important customer in the world? That would be really interesting. We still should identify relevant communities and either through paid placements or organic placements, develop deep relationships within communities. That doesn't change. But what does change is I suggest that we should still pay to situate our brands in mass media, because what mass media does is it provides a cultural context for our brands and social glue. Because we need to recognize three key things. Brands do not exist outside of culture. Brands live in culture. Brands, frankly, are cultural artifacts. And if your brand doesn't have meaning in culture, you aren't going to be able to close the sale. So making sure that your brand is part of the cultural conversation is worth paying for. Number two, you need to make sure that your brand messaging has a broader appeal than just to the individual. Because we know, even going all the way back to media and the South, we use media as a form of social glue. So that message must work as a form of social glue. Now, the last idea I want to leave with you is, in order for this to work, you need to be able to tolerate some level of ambiguity. I will not be able to prove in an attribution model that every impression that you gained in mass media delivered bottom line return on investment, and you need to accept that. Last slide, please. I want to leave you with some inspiration. So let's start off with the market of one. I'm giving you an example here from Spotify. Starting in 2016 and every year since, Spotify sends its listeners a highly personal email. They're wrapped, if you will. So this is a visual of somebody's personal year in listening. And what Spotify is doing is they're saying, hey, we understand you. This was your relationship with us through the past year. And look at all the interesting things that you did. Now, having this email creates an incredible sense of social glue, because then what audiences can do is share that with their friends and family. Now let's move to the center circle. I would like to introduce to you something that the New York Public Library did just this past year, and it won all kinds of awards, and deservedly so, with Instagram stories. They wanted to engage young people with the library, and they recognized that the way to do it was by bringing the libraries to young people, and they literally converted beloved novels into Instagram stories. These stories created communities around beloved stories and exponentially increased traffic to the New York Public Library and love for the brand. And the last example I want to give you is from Warby Parker. Warby Parker is one of the most successful direct-to-consumer case studies that we have out there. But look at what they did with Vogue magazine. They still understood that Vogue is an icon for fashion in culture. And Warby Parker knew that by partnering with Vogue and showing their eyewear within the pages of Vogue, they would develop brand equity that could then fuel their direct-to-consumer efforts. So I hope with this presentation today that I've gotten you to open up the idea that each of your customers have 3 dimensions: the self, the communities they engage in, and broad culture, and your marketing should do so as well. Thank you very much for your time today.
Judy, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being part of our Neextt Talks. I have a couple of questions that we have received from the participants.
Sure.
Number one, you said that media is part of the culture. So with this, you're saying that mass media is not dead. We still need to consider mass media in order to make our brands part of that culture.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes. So the interesting thing is that we have seen, actually, we've proven this academically, that we are social creatures, and there's something called social glue. We need common experiences to bind us together. So even though we have all of these choices, we still gravitate to choices that other people are watching and reading and listening to. So the interesting thing is we still have mass media. That mass media may have changed. So for example, when we look at the recent media landscape during the pandemic, Netflix turned into, I would argue Netflix was mass media before, but Netflix turned into mass media. Everyone was watching Tiger King, right? And so this idea that even though we had thousands of choices, we still gravitated toward what people were talking about. And that phenomenon hasn't gone away. Even though we've expected for it to, it consistently comes back. Now, is mass media, are the audiences as large as they were 30 years ago? No, but the idea of audiences coming together to gather around culturally significant themes, that hasn't gone away.
Great. I have another question here.
Sure.
It's about now brands are becoming media. You know, all brands are generating content. So
Yes.
how do you see how brands need to weight their media expenditure between their own channels and their paid channels?
Okay, you need to invite me back for another Neextt Talk, because I wrote a chapter in a textbook that was called Content Strategy in a Paid, Owned, and Earned Media World. And you can find that chapter. But I talk about 10 things that brands should be looking at. And given our time today, here's my advice to you. Think like a media company, not like you're trying to sell something. So if you have content that can engage with your customer's head or their heart, put it out there. But recognize you are then competing for a very limited share of their media day, okay? And so you have to be very selfless in the process and recognize that the only time that audiences are going to spend with your own channels is if you give them what they need, not what you are trying to sell. So that's a bit of advice number one. You need to think like a media company, literally like an editor. And you have to decide, do you have the credibility and the stamina to produce that content? Number two is you need to think about your customer base. So owned media works best for engaging with existing customers. If you are in an acquisition mode, you are much better off relying on paid media to reach audiences who aren't necessarily engaging with you, and keep your own channels for delivering special engagements with your current customers and especially your loyal customers.
Yeah, because right now, sometimes brands get confused. No, I think that, especially for instance, in the tourism industry, certain brand try to generate content thinking that they're going to have the same engagement as maybe travel and leisure. So
Exactly.
if you are an airline or a car rental or a hotel, even a destination, yes, you can generate brand, but you are not an expert. No, and the experts, which are the media and the editors, are the ones that are going to be. So you need to have your strategy to have some paid media through those channels, because they are generating a content that is more engaging with the audience. No?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, what I've found in my ad agency life and my consulting life is some marketers see content as part of their business strategy. Other marketers see content as a means of selling. And if content is a means of selling, you need to be very careful. And that's when you should be relying more on the professional media companies. But if content is a natural byproduct of what you do, then I think it's okay.
I have two more questions, Judy.
Sure.
One, influencers. What is your take on influencers? Are they reliable? Are they measurable? How someone is asking how to pick the right influencer for your brand?
Okay, Carlos has known me for a long time, so he knows that I wear my heart on my sleeve. I hate influencers. In fact, I wrote a piece for the Huffington Post. I said, marketers beware, you may be destroying the most powerful medium we have.
Word of mouth.
I believe that you cannot pay for word of mouth. That if you pay for word of mouth, you destroy word of mouth. Okay? So the important thing is, I think that influencers who are there for altruistic reasons and not to make money are okay, all right? So if I am doing it from the goodness of my heart, because I have a certain base of knowledge that I want to share with my community, and I make recommendations based upon that, I think influencer marketing is fine. What I'm very upset by is the idea, especially with young people, that they're all turning into experts and they're all willing to sell their soul for, you know, $200 that they're going to get paid by brands to, you know, show something on YouTube or snap a photo on Instagram. I think that's a very dangerous strategy, and I would be careful.
Just to adding on what you're saying, Judy, I think it's exactly as we were saying on the social media, between your own channels and the media channels for social media. No? There are influencers and there are opinion leaders. No, there always have been opinion leaders, and you can partner with an opinion leader that is not an influencer, and you use their channels to communicate. I don't know if there's a really famous travel agent, for instance, and you are a destination or a hotel. It's better to partner with that travel agent and use their social channels for their audience. It's not always having a lot of followers make it more effective. Or no, it's not about the number of followers, it's the quality of the followers.
Right, exactly. And unfortunately, now the one thing, and it goes back to the first question you asked about mass media, scale still drives our industry. So why do people try to gather up followers? Is because we tend to look at where the mass of audience is. But Carlos is absolutely right. It's the quality of the audience and the quality of the engagement. And to me, the interesting thing is here in the United States, I get very, very frustrated because I believe that the Federal Trade Commission is not doing enough to crack down on influencer marketing that is improperly labeled. So if a young influencer received money to hold up your product, it should be labeled as such, except right now, hashtag partner is buried amongst 25 other hashtags. To me, that doesn't cut it. So I want to know that when something is a paid sponsorship, I want to know. And I think as marketers, we can police ourselves. So if the FTC hasn't caught up to the bad behavior, we as esteemed brands can behave the way we want to engage with our customers, which is not tricking them.
Great. You talk about attribution models, Judy.
Yes.
What do you think about the last click strategies? A lot of people only give value to the last click.
I think multi-touch attribution and the last click strategy is forcing us into a direct response model, and it is ignoring consumer psychology and the steps in the consumer behavior process and assuming that that last click happened without all the other branding and influential cogs in the wheel that were necessary to get to that last click. So that's why I said, going back to my triangle slide, that point number 3, you need tolerance for ambiguity. And I am very angry that chief marketing officers are under so much pressure by the chief financial officer that you must validate every paid media expenditure because this is an expense on the balance sheet and we must cut every expense possible. That leads us into dangerous strategies because it forces us into media choices based upon what leaves a trail. And what's that expression? Everything that can be counted may not necessarily count, and that which truly counts may not be countable. I know I'm kind of goofing up that phrase, but you guys know what I mean. It's highly concerning to me.
I learned the other day that Mercedes-Benz feel or think that their awareness a portion of their plan or their strategy takes 20 years. They start marketing with people around 15 years old because they know the average people buys their first Mercedes at 35. So they were saying exactly that. If I'm spending 20 years on the awareness phase and I only give the value to the last touch point, so I'm not wasting that 20 years. I'm building my brand so I can get to that last touch point. Sorry for the dots, but it's what happened when we're in a pandemic. And Judy, I have another question here. It's from a content creator point of view. How do we create honest content, and how to work with brands while being faithful to our audience?
Okay, so how do we build content and how do we what? I couldn't hear the last point, I'm sorry.
How do we create partnerships with other brands or still being faithful to our audience?
Oh, I love the question about brand partnerships. So for example, I just received an email from Uber this morning that Uber is partnering with Clorox to make sure that all Uber vehicles are safe during our very difficult times. And I thought about that and I thought, wow, that was brilliant of Uber because of all the brand equities and brand associations. When I think of Clorox, I don't think of anything gentle, okay? I think that something, if you put Clorox to it, you will wipe out any germ possible. So I thought that that was brilliant. Now on the flip side, I thought, how beneficial was that for Clorox? Because does Uber have the right equity to help Clorox? So the way I would look at this is, do the brands that you're looking at partnering with share values at their core? Okay, so they don't necessarily need to be the same archetype, but do they fundamentally share the same values? And so in this case, I feel as though Uber is gaining more from Clorox than Clorox is gaining from Uber.
I think to touch a point that is really relevant right now. It's we're in the tourism industry. A lot of the people of our audience is in the tourism industry. And
Yes.
Because what is happening because of COVID, a lot of brands in the tourism industry are looking for partnership with cleaning companies. So
Yes.
Do you think that's the right strategy? Just to say, I'm the Ritz-Carlton, but I use Clorox, just as an example?
So the interesting thing, so if I need assurance that the hotel or the resort property is going to be incredibly safe, I think, yes, that gives me the assurance. And I also feel, though, from Clorox's point of view, it's different partnering, with a Hilton, the Hyatt, Ritz-Carlton brands than it is Uber. So, and I hope I'm not offending. I hope there isn't somebody from Uber on the call right now who's ready to, slap me. But I think that the key is this other brand a best in class, and is it going to give the consumer the assurance that they need? I think that's a wonderful strategy. Now, the downside to that, though, Carlos, is you might have brand partnerships, and if the brand does something that all of a sudden gets people angry. So here in the States, and I'm based in Chicago, so it's, you guys know, we have United Airlines who is at home here. And when that full United Airlines flight went viral and people got very upset that United was filling up the flights, if I were a resort doing a partnership with United at that moment, that could be a concern. So it is a risk because you need to worry not only about your own brand behavior, but the behavior partnering with too.
Definitely. I have another question here from the audience, Judy. It's, do we need to become 100% digital now? Do you think that non-digital media is dead?
I'm so glad that came up. So I hope that some of you will want to go out and buy Media from Chaos to Clarity. And if you do, be sure to buy the second edition. But here's the answer to that question. All media today are digital media. Every form of media now has a digital backbone to it. So outdoor is now digital. So I find the question to not be relevant anymore. Television's digital. So if I'm doing an ad campaign on Hulu, what do we call that? Do we call that television, or do we call it digital, or do we call it OTT or streaming video? I mean, I think the interesting thing is, for those of us who are of a certain age, we felt the divide, right? We lived in a world where there was all this media, and then there was media that lived on our computers. That has gone away. All media are digital. So I would encourage you to think more about your customer's day in the life. Go back to day parts. Think about, how do they live their day? What media do they engage with throughout their day? And where do you fit? Where would you be engaging with them versus interrupting them? So think from a customer point of view and not a channel point of view. And if you do that, you'll find that you will be channel agnostic, and it doesn't matter. It really doesn't, because all media today are digital. But I would rather you think about what are the right times and the right places to reach my customers with the right message and figure out what it is, rather than saying, what's my Facebook strategy? What's my Instagram strategy? What's my magazine strategy? You're better off audience-based planning versus channel planning.
Yes, there's still a lot of people that read magazines, read newspapers, that consume catalogs, listen to the radio. As you were saying, it's more about the lifestyle of your audience than how do you feel it's going to be better for them.
Absolutely.
You need to become part of their life instead of them becoming part of your marketing strategy or media strategy.
Absolutely. It's all about them and their lives, and inviting yourself in and making them feel like they are the most important customer in the world, and not stalking them because you need to fill rooms or you need to fill airplane seats. That's not their problem. That's your problem.
Last question, Judy.
Sure.
You mentioned that you think that we need to spend more with current clients or people that already we engage with or have a relationship with than to acquire new clients. Do you have any kind of percentage or weight that you can give us on how much of our plan do you think we need to spend it on our current loyal clients and how much in acquire new clients?
So if I had the formula, I would be a very rich woman, and I would be on my own private island right now. So no, unfortunately, there's no magic formula. And I also want you to know my view is becoming controversial, that there's a movement out there right now that I do not agree with, that brand loyalty is a fallacy and that you should constantly be working to acquire customers. And not me. So what I'm saying is that if you have a loyal customer, they will do two things for you. One of which is they will hopefully generate repeat revenue for you, and they will generate authentic word of mouth for you in their communities. So here we talk about influencer. I don't want you to have to pay an influencer. I would much rather, I went to this resort in Cancun, and I loved it. I'm not going to say the name of the resort because there may be a competitor on this call, but I had a wonderful experience, my husband and I. I now become an advocate for that resort. So when you maintain relationships with your customers, they become the most powerful media channel for you that you can ever have. The other thing that this has been proven, the cost to maintain a relationship with current customers is much lower than the cost to acquire new ones. So that's why I believe that you should always make your existing customers feel like the most important customers in the world. And then we could do a whole nother talk on RFM, recency, frequency, and monetary value. So if you are optimizing those three measures, you then drive monetary value from them. And though from my perspective as a professor who teaches media, they become a media channel for you. On the reverse, if you upset a customer, they become a media channel for you, and it's not pleasant, right? Word of mouth works two ways, right?
Definitely. Now that you mentioned your experience at the hotel, I was reading that 90% of the people, regular leisure travelers, don't repeat hotels on their vacations, either because they choose another destination for the next following vacation, or if they come back to the same destination, they are driven maybe by a promotion or something. But I guess that there's a really strong tool, super powerful tool that people don't give value to, that is called emails. No, if you acquire emails from those past guests and they give you permission to keep a conversation with them, no, and it's going to be less expensive to engage with them via emails or newsletters than, as you were saying, spending a lot of money trying to acquire new ones with your strategies in social media and paid advertising, etc.
Absolutely. Everyone needs to remember there is so much clutter in social media. It's scary. So here, back in the day, we used to complain about commercial loads on television. I'm laughing. I mean, now every third scroll in your news feed and Facebook is a sponsored post. It's a problem. It's a big problem.
Yeah, now we're getting to I just said that's another talk, because it's the viewability of the ads. No, it's a lot of, no, the media, especially the internet, someone had a great idea of, in order to make more money, to put more banner ads on the page. You receive newsletter with 100 of sponsor opportunities, or you see pages with 20 spaces for advertising. People really seeing those? Are those impressions really impacting someone? So that's another conversation. So Judy, thank you very much. Thank you very much for taking time to share with us your experience, your knowledge. Just tell me something. Where do people can find your book? It's in Amazon. Can they go to Amazon and buy your book?
My book is widely available on Amazon. Media from Chaos to Clarity, 2nd edition. I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you very much. I hope to see you soon.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Pues muchas gracias a todos que nos acompañaron el día de hoy en esta primera sesión de la segunda temporada de Neextt Talks. Nuestra siguiente plática será el día 21 de julio, 11 de la mañana. Tendremos a Expedia hablando sobre la resiliencia de la industria turística, ¿no? Les recuerdo entrar a la página de neextt.com, a nuestras redes sociales. Más importante, que pueden escuchar el podcast bajándolo de Spotify, o pueden ver las sesiones en video en nuestro canal de YouTube. Si tienen alguna pregunta adicional que quieren que le hagamos llegar a Judy, la pueden dejar aquí en el chat, o la pueden dejar a través de nuestras redes sociales. Sobre la primera temporada de Neextt, estamos a punto de publicar, para que estén pendientes, las 36 ideas que consideramos son las ideas más importantes que se generaron de esa primera sesión de Neextt Talks hacia el futuro de los viajes. Muchas gracias a todos y nos vemos por aquí el día 21 de julio.